Hi folks, this is Professor DiBiase, and I want to talk a little bit about the first major project, and I'm going to do this in a series of videos. The first one, we're going to talk about the project and its purpose, things you should be thinking about as you move into the project, things to be thinking about before you start the actual formal drafting of your first draft of the assignment. And so I'm just going to walk us through the document, and as I do so, I'll try to highlight some things that I think are important for you to note and try and talk through some of my thought process in terms of what the assignment is calling on you to do. So this is going to be called Composing the College Admissions Essay, a Genre Set Analysis Case Study. So let's break this down a little bit before we go any further, right? So composing the college admissions essay. So you're all attending college in the fall. You all presumably applied to a number of colleges and universities, and it is an almost universal requirement of those applications that you send in a college admissions essay. And the nature of that essay can vary from college to college, or if they're using sort of the common application, there tends to be a general question that you must respond to. But either way, the college admissions essay is a kind of writing that at this point you're probably quite familiar with, as you likely did several drafts of that essay before applying to your various colleges and universities. So this is something on which you are somewhat of an expert, and it's really fresh in your minds, in fact much fresher than even a student who'd be taking this class in the fall. So that's where we're going to begin. That's going to be sort of the focus of our analysis, right? And then I say a genre set analysis case study. Well, what do we mean by that? So a genre is a type of writing. So for example, a college admissions essay is a kind of genre. It is a kind of writing that has certain common features with a common audience to serve a common recurring purpose. And a genre set is a collection of various genres that typically go together and work together within a particular system to accomplish a particular set of tasks. So, for example, when we think about the college admissions process, there is a lot of reading and writing that goes into that process. From reading a college's website or promotional material to writing notes about your thoughts on various colleges or notes from a tour that you might have taken, to the college admissions essay itself, to communications that might occur via email between you and an admissions person at a college or university. It might involve even the messages that you sent in the lead up to your application process, or as you were discussing this with friends and family in terms of your thoughts on the process and the schools that you were looking at. So it's a process that really is saturated with reading and writing. And so we can take a look at the kinds of reading and writing that occur in that process and begin to identify the various genres at play and start to think about how one might impact the other. When I say case study, what I mean is that of all of the genres that we could look at within this genre set tied to college admissions, we're specifically going to be looking at one genre, which would be the admissions essay itself, and it's a case study in the sense that you're looking at a specific example of a college admissions essay or essays being your own. And this project is going to tie together a lot of the things that we looked at in week 1 and that we're going to be looking at in week 2. So when we think about week 1, some of the main concepts from both the first and second chapter would include things like conceptions, right? What we think about something, what we think about our world. And with respect to this project, right, your conceptions of your audience, of what matters to a college admissions board, what a college is looking for, what the purpose of an application is, right? All shape your choices as a writer. It's going to draw from transfer. So thinking about, what kinds of writing or reading were you doing, maybe even outside the context of, or did do outside of the context of college admissions that you were able to draw from in the process of writing that essay, because realistically, we don't write college admissions essays very often, except for when we're applying to college. So what were the kinds of writing experiences that maybe you drew from that helped shape that process? And obviously genre, which we'll get into a little bit more later. When we think about week 2, we're going to be drawing from conversations around conducting research, and we'll talk a little bit about that early in the week, and writing process, which will really take up most of our discussion of during week 2, both in terms of discussing drafting, but also how we study process, issues that writing study scholars think about with respect to process. All of those things are going to play a role. So what's the goal of the project, right? I think it's helpful to think about the goal of the project. So the way I put it, to critically reflect upon the ways in which you have developed an approach to writing that culminated in the production of materials that you used to apply to college. So the goal as a writer here is to really think hard about how it is that you came to produce this particular document, right? What were the things that went into producing it? Both in terms of sort of the nuts and bolts of, well, here's how I wrote it. I began by doing X, and then I did Y, and finally I did Z. But also thinking about how that process was shaped by your experiences of reading and writing around the broader issue of college admissions. And in reflecting on how you came to produce this document and the ways in which that production was shaped by a number of factors, including the other genres in the broader genre set of college admissions, you're going to improve your metacognitive skills, which really just means your ability to think about your own thinking. So being able to be aware of, what your tendencies are, what your strengths are. If you can identify your own process, that gives you a window into where you might intervene to change that process for future tasks. It's also going to help you by getting you to think about the kinds of questions that writing studies scholars ask in order for us to better understand writing and help you think to think as a member of this community. And one of the hallmarks of sort of going through college is learning to not just understand content within a discipline, but begin to develop the habits of mind that go along with being in that discipline. So for example, if you're a psychology major, it's not enough that you learn the facts, the quote-unquote facts around psychology or the theories of psychology. Ideally, by the time you finish your degree, you'll have understood what the habits of mind of a psychologist or a psychology researcher are, right? The questions that you ask, the methods that you use to answer those questions. And the same goes for any field of study, whether it's languages, whether it's business, whether it's nursing, whether it's history, whether it's political science. It's not enough to just know the stuff, right? Just to memorize the textbook, right? It's about learning to think in a particular kind of way, right? To ask a certain set of questions. Third, this is going to help lay out some of the conversation that we're going to have in week 3. So in week 3, we're really going to dive into the concept of literacy and literacies, and a big part of that is thinking about how we come into the literacy practices that we participate in, right? How do we become literate in the way that we have? What factors have our parents played, our homes played, our peer groups, our schools, etc.? And so by thinking about process and our own processes now, we can begin to interrogate how those processes came to be as we make our way through weeks 3 and 4. As I note here, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about discourse in week 4 and even rhetorical ecologies in week 5, but I'm going to hold off on going into too much detail there because I don't need to make this more complex than it needs to be. So here's the question we're trying to answer as we sort of put on our writing studies scholar hat. Right? How does the concept of genre sets apply to the college admissions and application process, and how does the interplay between the genres in this particular set impact the writing process of a particular genre, the college admissions essay? And this is just a really sort of sophisticated way of saying how do the various kinds of writing that we encounter when we're applying to college shape the way we approach the college admissions essay task? So how does, for example, a college's website help you understand something about the audience that you're writing towards that then impacts the way that you construct your application, right? then that's just one possible example of this. There's no predetermined answer for this question, because you are the researcher, right? You're the one who's going to see what you can figure out and make a case for why your analysis makes sense. And again, we'll talk more about how we'll do that over the course of the week. But that's kind of where we're going with this, right? So again, how does the way that different genres operate in this particular context or situation impact the production of a particular genre, in this case, the actual essay that you wrote and submitted for your applications? When we think about your audience, right, it's always important to think about our audience. You're going to be writing towards writing studies scholars who have an interest in genre and student composing practices. And this is a very real audience. I am part of that audience. So when you're writing towards this audience, right, you're going to want to demonstrate that you have a good mastery over the terminology that you're using, and that you're able to do some pretty interesting and rigorous analysis of what you're going to be talking about. In terms of the methodology, we're going to be doing some genre analysis and some case studies. So we're going to start by looking at certain genres, right? You're going to identify the different kinds of writing and reading that you encounter in your application process. And then from there, you're going to move on to a more case study discussion of a specific genre and its production. So what that means is you'll start your projects by sort of looking at, here's the broader network of genres that we see in this particular kind of situation. You're going to describe those genres, how they operate, why are they important, and then from there, begin to talk us through your own process of putting together your college admissions essay and calling back to how that process might have been impacted by other kinds of reading and writing that you did in the context of the process from start to finish. So here in the research process, I'm really laying out a number of ideas for generative writing that you can do so that before you begin drafting, and we'll talk more about why we do this on Monday, before you begin the drafting, to begin thinking through the ideas that you might have. So I give you some suggestions here, right? So making a list of the kinds of writing or text that were involved in thinking about college. And again, texts can be defined really broadly, right? So when I was in college 1,000 years ago, the only texts that you really encountered would be like an actual book you would go buy at a bookstore with a list of colleges and descriptions and facts and figures. And then you'd get, 1,000, letters from every college with a brochure. It wasn't like these places had really sophisticated websites. No one was making videos and all, and yet those are kinds of texts that you might consider for the purposes of this project. Now again, when we're thinking about this, right, again, what kinds of genres did you produce? What kinds of writing did you write? I'll even add in here, I'm going to do this right now. What kinds of texts did you read or consume, right? What were there, and when we think about genre, right, and we go back to chapter 2, we can think about, questions we can ask of genre, right? What were the features of the genre? What were the purposes? What were the audiences? Try to name the genres that you identify. So if you're sort of, putting these different kinds of writing in different piles, right, what would we call them? And again, think broadly, because there's no such thing as a trivial piece of writing when it comes to writing studies. So once you've made the list, right, I want you to get some representative samples of those genres, right? So for example, like find a copy of an application, find a copy of your admissions essay. If you talk about the websites, right, identify a good, example website that you think is representative of that genre. I make a note here, like we often call these things artifacts, right? That's the thing we study, right? These are artifacts of writing. And I give you a couple examples here, right? Emails, notes, etc. And these are, again, particularly ones that you may have created, but you might also look more at genres that you consumed, right, as a reader as well. Again, thinking broadly about this, right, I even mentioned like a college tour is a kind of text, right, that you could engage with here. So once you've collected your samples, right, you want to begin to identify patterns, within the genres, right? So what makes each genre distinct, right? What makes, for example, the application form an application form, right? What are the features that sort of define it as such? What defines a college website, right? What defines, even talking about like, your text messages as a kind of genre, right? Or your informal text messages, right? What are the defining features of them? Whether it's grammatical or content, whatever. And then you're going to want to think about, right, patterns that you see among the different genres, right? So again, where do you see these genres intersecting? Where do you see them directly responding to one another or referencing one another? Where do you see them shaping one another or your response to the different genres in various ways? So again, as an example, right, you might think about how your experience on a tour tells you, hypothetically, if you were to take a tour of Fairfield University, they would definitely talk about Jesuit values. Taking the tour on Jesuit, and maybe you learned something about various values at other institutions that you toured. And so you might talk about how, well, if we think about a college tour as a kind of text and a kind of genre, one of the features of that genre is talking about the institution's values. By understanding its values, that can end up shaping a college admissions essay because you want to appeal to your audience's values, as we kind of saw last week with respect to rhetorical reading. And so that's one of the ways that it could impact your decision. And here's an example of that in my own college admissions essay. And while you're doing all of this, right, I want you to be writing your ideas down, whether you're typing them or handwriting them, whatever, because writing isn't just a way to kind of lock down your thoughts, right? Writing is a way to produce new thoughts. And in the process of writing, you might see things that you might not have seen previously. And I know here too, write down your thoughts on these questions, but I'm not going to say like write down your answers because it's too early to come to any conclusions, and that's fine. So don't get too hung up on having looked at this stuff and saying, well, this is exactly what I'm going to write about. It might take some iteration to get where you need to go. I also know here, right, you should be thinking about what connections you see between our course readings, right? Either either stuff from chapter 1 or chapter 2, or what we'll be looking at this week in week 2. And I want you to keep track of those because when we discuss what the actual project is going to need to look like, you're going to have to cite the textbook, right? You're going to have to cite the readings in the textbook in order to accomplish what the assignment is going to do. And we'll again talk more about that next week. But it's something that you want to keep track of now so that you're not scrambling when you're putting together your drafts to find sections of the text that you think are relevant to the discussion that we're having here. And again, this is a reminder of the things that we want to keep our attention on, right? So how do the different texts that surround the college admissions process, again, texts that you both produce, right, that you write, create, etc., and texts that you consume, right, as a reader, listener, viewer, tour goer, etc. How do they come together to form a genre set? And how does the nature of that set impact or shape the process of putting together that college admissions essay? So how did your experience of engaging with all of these kinds of texts, either as writer or reader, broadly defined, impact your process of deciding what you were going to write about, how you chose to go about that writing, etc. And so again, right now your goal is simply to be writing around these ideas and giving yourself the freedom to play in the space, right? To think through these issues and ask questions and not get too hung up on any firm answers or approaches just yet. Early in next week, really from Monday to Wednesday, you'll have an opportunity to begin the actual first draft, what we're going to call our sort of shitty first draft, as you'll see from our Monday readings. And from there, we'll continue to develop this until the final version is due around the 20th. So make sure that you're doing some of this background work so that you have a good body of knowledge, to work off of as you begin putting together that first draft. And of course, if there are questions about this, I am happy to answer them. via email or during office hours.